Hello and welcome to the Sprint 82 review. This was a regular sprint, but we're meeting at an irregular time because we had some scheduling challenges here within Red Hat. Next time we will be returning to our normal 10:30 a.m. Eastern slot. On this slide here we have. So I will be giving an overview of the sprint. John will give us an update on the community. Dan will give us an update on the UI. Adam, Bronagh, and Rich will update us on the providers. Tina on Automate. Gregg on the platform. Alberto on the REST API. And Chris on documentation. Next slide. All right, so we had 350 pull requests merged. The top three repositories that they landed in were the integration tests, the classic UI, and the core repo. So that's to be expected, and really good distribution. And I do want to note that the fourth repo there is documentation, so kind of representative of all the different teams working on the product here. Next slide, please. This sprint, we're back down from 408 to 350 as we focus more and more on fixing various bugs and stabilizing the code base out there. Next slide, please. The distribution is, as you can see there, there's 38%. The majority is in bugs. The other one is 36% is enhancements, and then everything else is following that. So pretty expected distribution here so far. Next slide. And then the repository health. Here, green is good, red is bad. So the one that seems like it's a little out of whack is the classic UI with 140 extra issues. I'm assuming those are coming out of one of the tools that we're using. What else is off here? And the Amazon provider looks like it went up in terms of code duplication. Not sure why. It went up by like quarter or something, from like 80 to 108. So it would be good to figure out why that happened. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Over to you, John.
Thank you, Oleg. We recently released Barenboim 2, and I'm finally able to say it without stopping. And we've recently changed from last week to last month, and ManageIQ, the blog entry, and Drew picked it up, and she's written vignettes. A very interesting blog entry. If you haven't read it, please read it. It's very interesting. Upcoming events, there's Red Hat Summit in May 8th through the 10th in San Francisco. ManageIQ will be in Community Central, and OSCAL 2018, that is in May 19th and 20th in Tirana, Albania. Thank you. I even practice it. ManageIQ booth and possible talks. And the survey, there was a survey hosted to help improve the quad icons or give some feedback on different styles. And that survey is now closed. I'm sure they're pulling together all the results. And whoever's participated, we appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
All right, over to Dan.
All right. So interestingly, the count of PRs was exactly the same as last sprint, 83, and actually the enhancements count was exactly the same as last sprint, 18. But we did have 10 more bug fix PRs, so we are definitely buckling down on getting the bugs taken care of. Some of the enhancements that were notable. The first one was for V2V, the ability to actually hide columns, mainly from the UI views, so that in V2V, when they download those actual data into CSV files, there's some extra columns in there that allow the user to be able to uniquely identify the VMs that they want to migrate in the V2V. We took some of the UX feedback and applied that to the expression editor, so that styling has changed. I've got a screenshot of that. Some credentials, vault credentials were added to the UI for Ansible. Some changes were done in Automate as well to pick up some extra fields and only make them visible depending on what type of objects they are. As far as using the dialogues, there's more objects as classes that you can use the dialogues on now, so they're listed there. And the V2V UI plugin can now be added as to the gem file, so you can now get that to show up in the UI in a new tab, Compute Migration. Next slide. Some recent important bug fixes. There were some style-related fixes in the dialog editor to kind of clean that up a little bit. The schedule editor had a problem converting the start time properly. Apparently, we lost the delete button in the servers inside of a zone. Needed to get that back. Compare and drift counters were fixed, and the storage controller needed to be able to show custom buttons. Somehow that got missed when the storage UI part was added. Next slide. And here you have the old and the new expression editor. You can see it's a lot cleaner with new pattern fly elements. Got rid of the red and the bright yellow. The question marks, which everybody wondered what that meant. Now we actually say what it means. It's basically a new element you're working on. Also moved the condition buttons below the expression so that instead of having a raft of buttons and you kind of had to figure out what they were, now you have the undo, redo, and delete buttons on top, and then you can add conditions and or not below that. Some titles added as well, so you're working on an expression, then when you click on a certain element in that expression, you can see that element is brought forward on the bottom. That shows you exactly what element you're working on. For the UI. Next.
Okay, so I'm going to share an update on public cloud providers. Adam will talk about on-premise providers, and Rich will update us on smart state analysis. Next slide, please. The most merged pull requests this sprint came from the VMware provider, followed by the Azure provider, and then followed jointly by the OpenStack and Amazon providers. Next slide, please. So this was another very strong sprint for the Azure provider. Latislab implemented a number of optimizations that were very impactful. So we now only fetch orchestration stacks and templates whose timestamp has changed since the previous refresh. So in addition to dramatic speed optimizations, this also prevents the event storm that was caused by exporting so many orchestration templates. So second, we now fetch the inventory from Azure in parallel instead of sequentially, and then we cache it for later processing. And third, the targeted refresh of a virtual machine now triggers a targeted refresh of the virtual machine's storage. Previously, we would gather all of the storage. So a full refresh of our small test environment takes 120 seconds compared to 2,200 seconds before this PR was merged, which is like a 95% performance improvement. And targeted refresh now takes 15 to 20 seconds compared to 40 seconds previously. So I think these are really outstanding improvements. Next slide, please. So Tom added targeted refresh for Azure resource groups. We now trigger a targeted refresh for the security rules and the VM lock and unlock events. The Amazon provider, we added support for the newly released M5 instance type. Next slide, please. Over to Adam.
Thank you. So the OpenStack team this sprint improved the VM provisioning form. They have better parsing of error messages that are raised during provisioning, and they'll now filter networks that don't have a subnet from the available networks for a VM that you can select. They also fixed targeted refresh for Network Manager when that refresh was kicked off by an event. On the VMware side for vSphere, we moved the rest of the core services from the core repo out into the VMware repository. Those were the Vim Connect Mixin, the core refresh worker, and the Vim broker. So those are all now out of the core repo and in the VMware repository. And on the vCloud side, they fixed an issue which could lead to vApp duplication where we were using a hash of an XML file, and vCloud sometimes would reorder elements in the XML file, which actually obviously changes the hash, but it's still the same vApp. So now they're doing a different method of identifying VM, so that doesn't happen. And that's it. Next slide.
Okay, this sprint for Smart State, we have some fixes for our newly deployed Amazon Smart State implementation. Initially, when we chose a VPC to attach to our agent, we wanted to ensure that that agent would be reachable through the network, and we did that by saying it doesn't have a public IP address. Strangely enough, it can have a public IP address and not a gateway, rendering it unreachable. So now we check that the VPC does have an attached gateway, so we'll be able to reach it. In addition, we discovered, or was brought to our attention, that there's a race condition when we create the AIM role for the agent the first time we deploy it. Before the permissions propagate, we may try to start the agent before that's completed. So we've implemented retry code there, so it won't fail. Before it would fail, and the smart state would be disabled. On the storage side, we encountered some issues where in installations, when Swift and/or Cinder services were not available, would result in some ugly messages in the log and continuous retries. We now no longer assume that those services are available and act accordingly. And that's it. Tina's next? Tina?
Yes, thanks, Rich. We had 11 PRs merge this sprint. Lucy added vault credentials for Ansible playbook methods and service templates. Drew Yu completed the initial work for retirement as a request with the addition of new request and task models for service and VM retirement. The retirement as a request work will continue for the next few sprints. Eric added support for additional object types for the dialog runner for custom buttons. Next slide, please. Fabian continued his V2V transformation work with the addition of 2 new automate classes as shown here. The System Common Methods MIQ AE class contains the weighted update status method, and the Transformation State Machines VM Transformation class describes the states to transform a virtual machine. Next slide, and over to Greg.
All right, thanks, Tina. So on the platform side, we had 29 PRs merged this sprint. Actually, more enhancements than bugs this go around. So I'll talk about some of those. So Libor made a couple of nice changes on chargeback and metering. He's added the rates. You can select as a column the rates that are being used to calculate the cost, which makes it a lot easier to look at the report and understand, when you see the usage and the cost that was calculated, how it got that way. Also on metering reports, he added the beginning and end of the resource's existence, its life, which is important for metering. I have a couple examples of that in screenshots coming up. And Yuri made a nice change to the queue. This is something we needed to do for quite a while, and that is to update the MIQ task, if there's one associated with a queue message, with the start timestamp, if it's not already updated and there's a task associated. It was defaulting to the updated on time, which is close, but probably in most cases wrong. And then this next one, truncating real-time metrics, I wanted to mention this. Actually, this came in the previous sprint, but I forgot to put it on the slides because Keenan did this. This is a huge improvement to purging of real-time metrics. Since we have all the real-time metrics tables laid out into hourly separate tables representing each hour, it's much more efficient to just truncate the tables for the tables that are outside of the purge time window. And actually that has, not only is it more efficient, it also doesn't leave bloat in a database like it would when you're deleting rows, and they have to get vacuumed up. So that's a huge improvement, big change. And there was also a change, this is part of a sequence of changes to get rid of Vim performance tag values. So it's no longer backed by the DB table. I think there's still one more PR left on the schema side just to drop the table completely, but we're not even using it now. Generating reports based on grouping by tags is all done on the fly at this point. And we also added support for hidden columns in reports and views. Probably a small use case, but could be useful if you So basically, you can specify in a report that a column is hidden, and it won't show in a view in the UI. It won't show in the HTML or PDF output of the report, but it will be included in the CSV output, and you can use that for correlation, for outside systems of objects that are on the report. It actually was, excuse me, it was actually done for some of the V2V work that they're doing, that the Automate team is working on. So they can correlate lists of VMs back to the EMS reference that they came from. Next slide, please. So there's an example of the rates. I have them highlighted there in red. You can see on the chargeback reports. This is you can select these as you would other columns on the report, so you don't have to see them if you don't want them. Next slide. And here's the beginning of existence and end of existence for resources on the metering report example. And that's it for platform. I'll turn it over to Alberto.
Thank you, Greg. Yep, so on the REST API side of things, we had a couple of enhancements that came in for supporting alert definition profiles. So the first one here, Jillian added the primary collection for enterprises. Again, it's needed for alert definition profile assignments. It's exposed as API enterprises. Normally, you'll get just a single resource, but it's a formal collection. So enterprises, the collection, and the enterprise ID. Next slide, please. Okay, next enhancement, basically finishing that story, is we needed to expose the href for the enterprise of the running server. So what we've done is enhance the server info hash section to include that, as shown here, highlighted, the enterprise href. And that helps clients so that they don't need to fetch that additional information with another query in case they need to do things like assigning that another definition profile for that. So it's available to them. Next slide, please. Okay, so this enhancement by Jillian, again, it's assigning and unassigning resources to alert definition profiles. So we've extended the alert definition profiles entry point there. The actions can be done on single resources or by bulk, as shown in the examples here. The assignments can be done by object reference as well as tagging. I have an example in the next slide. And on the bottom are examples of querying information about the alert definition profiles, what they're assigned to. You can query the taggings as well as the get assigned to's virtual attribute. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is one example. It's a sample assignment of resources to an alert definition profile 5. Here, giving you a feel of the flexibility of this API, where you can assign API hosts by tag. The examples, tagging by href, tagging by category and name. You can also assign for a particular resource, in this case, the API clusters ID 12, or for the whole enterprise, as shown here below. And that's it for the API. Next slide, please.
Hi, on documentation, in this sprint, we had 16 PRs merged, 11 of which were enhancements. The remaining 5 were bugs. Some highlights, PRs that we added in this sprint were we corrected some steps to configure the replication global copy, added a section on appliance types and updated roles. We added a note about importing and exporting across different versions of ManageIQ. We added a note about older OpenShift providers. That's it. Next slide, please.
All right. And with that, we conclude the Sprint 82 review, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.